All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our next installment of Indian Education for All across the content, our third Tuesday's offering. A reminder, we'll be offering these every third Tuesday through May. We've got so many wonderful presenters coming up. Next up in November is Melody Small, who is a science teacher extraordinaire. I've known Melody for many years and seen her present and teach, and she's just phenomenal. And so if you're wanting science content, make sure to join us in November. But tonight we have the absolutely wonderful Adriane Tailfeathers presenting on math from Browning. She's a sixth grade math teacher and has been teaching for about 5 years. And I know that she's got a really great presentation in store for us this evening. But right before Adriane begins, I would also like to introduce our new OPI math coordinator, Katrina Engeldrum. So Katrina, would you like to say hello to everyone?
Hello, everyone. My name is Katrina. I live in Polson, and it is a pleasure to be here and supporting this training today.
Well, we're excited to have a math coordinator again. Yay. And I know almost everybody here, make sure to take down these names because I'm quite certain these could be good resources and, folks that if we need to hit them up for any of our math resource development, etc. Wonderful groups. So anyhow, thank you everyone for being here. And make sure to check the chat. There is the sign-in sheet for the professional development units. One professional development unit is available for today. This will be recorded. It does take us a little while to get them captioned properly, so please be patient with us as if it takes a little while before you see those. And what else? Oh, big news, big news. If you weren't with us last time, we are for certain having our 17th annual Indian Education for All Best Practices Conference, March 8th and 9th, 2024 in Billings. It'll be an in-person conference. Our call for proposals is open. So if you have wonderful things that you are excited to share, please do fill out a call for proposals, and I will put that link in the chat as well. And we have pre-registration for the conference open as well. And we are asking your, input on what types of sessions you're looking for, and if you're interested in some of our in-person workshops that we're going to be doing, so you can have a foot in the door already, so to speak, if you do the pre-registration process. So at some point in time, I'll be putting those information into the chat. So if you'd like to sign in, there is a link in the chat, and it may, if you just joined, let me put it in the chat really quickly here. Here we go. So if you click on that link, it'll take you to a Google Sheet and you can sign in, and we'll get you your professional development units. So I think that is all. And again, thank you all for joining us, and take it away, Adriane.
Awesome. Thank you, Jennifer. And I apologize, I might mute myself here and there throughout the presentation. I'm getting over a cold and I don't want like me coughing on the recording. But let's get started. So let's go here. Awesome. All right, great. So welcome again. I'm Adriane Tailfeathers, and like Jennifer said, I am a sixth grade math teacher. I've been a math teacher for about, the entirety of my career. I've been the math teacher at Browning Middle School for the past 3 or 4 years. And I always like to start off with, and I hope you can see this, and I guess you can tell me in the chat if you can. I always like to start off with, who I am, where I come from, because I think that's kind of how I enter my classroom and how my kiddos enter, is we kind of get a sense of where we come from. And so again, Oki ni stu ni danaku Mǎatsoōwǎak ki ni mototo itonyo So my name is Adriane Tailfeathers, and I always like to share these photos because these are the people that really inspire me. I have family members, I have coworkers, past, current, a lot of my family, if you don't know me, a lot of my family is in the education system, and we pretty much work at Browning Public Schools. I also have a couple of photos of my students. You can see like at the bottom left is my first class. We did ribbon skirts and ribbon shirts, and that's something I'm always really proud of, and they were really proud of. But I always like to ground myself with who I am, where I come from, and where I'm going. Great. So I'm just going to get right into it because I could literally spend the whole entire hour talking about myself. All right. Okay. Just if you're like me, I need to know exactly what we're doing. I need to have a plan and know what it's going to look like. So we're going to run through a percent lesson that I do in my classroom. And I do have where you're entering it in the chat, or if you feel more comfortable, just unmuting yourself too, that works as well. And then we're going to talk about resources and strategies, and then at the very end, we'll have time for questions. Great. So let's get started. All right. So sorry. You can hear I'm at the school because they have better internet than I do at home. So hopefully we don't have too many interruptions. But in the chat, we're gonna write our way in. So I am a math teacher, but I really like to push literacy, and that's kind of one of my strong points as well. So in the chat, we're just gonna write our way in. So how much percentage of votes should be required to serve on the Blackfeet Tribal Business Council? So just in the chat, just write your way in. And I always like to do this with my kiddos. So we always write our way in. So again, we're just joining us, we're writing our way in. So how much percentage of votes should be required to serve on the Blackfeet Tribal Business Council? Got some good percentages, a lot of high percentages. Awesome. Yeah, and if you're like my students, sometimes they get really technical. They're like, oh, 98.4% majority. Again, we write our way in. So even though I teach math, we're always trying to hone those literacy skills, and especially handwriting in this technological world we live in. So again, the question, how much percentage of votes should be required to serve on the Blackfeet Tribal Business Council? Great. So I'm just looking through the chat. Okay, and we're going to revisit that question towards the end. All right, so when we're talking about the Blackfeet Tribal Business Council, part of the responsibilities of the council, right, is to oversee the management of our lands, resources, business enterprises, and I have that bold because it's really important, and programs and services of the tribe. So they oversee a lot, right? And just like what we learn is we're our own government, and there's a lot of things that go into play when we're talking about the council. Awesome. Okay, so I hope you can see this just in the chat. We're going to look at this photo and just share what you're looking at, or what do you see in this photo? I hope you can see it. So just in the chat, what are we looking at? So again, what are we looking at? What do you see? Right, there's a lot of information, and this is a photo that I share with my kiddos when we do this lesson. Awesome. Love the participation. We got polling centers, eligible voters, voter info. All right. Awesome. Number of eligible voters. Great. So when I have done this in the past, I always try to team up with the ELA teacher and the social studies teacher. So luckily, the team that I work on, we work really well together, and we always try to match up our lessons to our own individual subjects. And so this particular lesson was kind of my portion of when we talked about voters, tribal elections, government. And so although this is like just a small piece, this is a huge unit in itself, and I work with a lot of awesome ladies that kind of we build on what we're teaching. Awesome. So let's look at another picture, and I'll kind of move the chat over. Okay, so we have a little bit more information on this slide. And so hopefully you can see, oh gosh, and I apologize if things are getting cut off. But we can see that we are looking at the polling places on the Blackfeet reservation. And on the right side, we can see eligible voters, right, in those specific places. And I always kind of get a sense of, we always go through with all my kiddos, you know, if you lived in town, where would your polling place be? Or if you lived in Heart Butte, where would your polling place be? Or East Glacier, we kind of go through like, where would you end up being if you were able to vote, right? And this is based on the election in 2016. And so we had about 13,000, a little over 13,000 eligible voters, which is, we're gonna use that number throughout this entire lesson. Great. I feel like I've been talking forever and I really haven't. So yeah, so we go through the different polling places, you know, where would you vote? I live in town. My last name is a T, and so I'm usually voting S through Z, right? And all of these resources I got from the documents or the election board, right? Okay, so we're gonna hold on to that 13,000. Let's go to the next slide, and hopefully don't want to miss any questions. If you have a question or anything, just post it in the chat. All right, so I kind of jumped the gun, but I always have my students look at this, right? And we talk about eligible voters. What is eligible? What does that mean? This lesson builds off of an identity lesson that I created, and we talk about, we look at the Constitution, and even though you may live in the community, even though you may, your family have been here forever, right? There's just some things in place that, according to our Constitution, that can make you eligible or ineligible. So we kind of have already had that conversation at this point, right? So to be eligible, you have to be 18 and you have to be enrolled. So you have to have at least 1/4 of Blackfeet blood, right? And we look at that 13,000 and it seems like a lot of votes, and you think, wow, that's a lot of our members that can vote. But as we look further into this, we can see how much exactly vote. All right, so getting to the math portion, because you're probably like, this kind of feels like a social studies. Yes and no. So percent means per 100 or out of 100, right? And at this point in the lesson, we have already gone over this and we've used the grids. And so they have some sort of idea of percent. And so I always like to pull out these grids because a lot of my kiddos are like me, where I'm a visual person. And so I need to see that 10 by 10 grid. So again, we're going to keep this vocab term, percent per 100, right? Okay, so in the chat, I want you to state how many boxes are shaded in the 10 by 10 grid. So not percent, we're just talking about boxes right now. So how many are shaded in the 10 by 10 grid? Awesome. Loving the participation. And this is a really great refresher, especially if you teach in the middle school, and probably what we're seeing everywhere, right? We kind of see those gaps. And so I always try to make it where it's accessible for all my learners first. Great. So how many are shaded in the 10 by 10 grid? So you have to have that blood quantum, like specific blood quantum for Blackfeet in order to be eligible to vote, right? And you have to be a member, right? And that's where that blood quantum comes into play. And so that's kind of something we talk about at the end, where we talk about, well, we have people in our community that are doing really awesome things, and they're reviving all of this cultural knowledge, and how do we get to the point where everyone who has a hand in this community, how can we make better choices, right? And I try not to put any of my beliefs down, or I just try to give them the tools so that they can make their own decision, right? Because I may have my ideas about blood quantum, and their family may have their own ideas, right? All of it is really about identity. Awesome. So we can tell that there are 9 shaded, right? So when we talk about 9 out of the 100, right? And you already knew what I was going to say. So we're identifying the percent represented in the grid. So we're looking at that percentage. So just in the chat, right? I just want you to post, what is the percent shown? Again, percent is per 100. Great. Awesome. Great. So let's go. So we identified that there's 9 boxes shaded and there is 9% represented, right? Okay, so now we're just going to quickly look at the general election. So we have primary, and that's where we have a lot of people vying for usually just 4 positions. And then we have our general election, and this is our general election, right? This is the results from 2016. So you can kind of see the different positions and the different candidates, right? Right. So I kind of, I show them this and we kind of talk about like, what are you seeing? Do you know any of these people? Most often, because I work in the community that this election is held, right? A lot of times it's, oh, that's my uncle or that's my grandpa, right? And so we try to make those connections. All right, so we're gonna look at these numbers, right? So we can see that there's total votes, only 2,496. If we look at position 1, we are looking at Earl Old Person, and we have 1,293. And compared to King Davis, 1,203. So then we're going to look back at this, right? And so there's eligible voters. So when we're looking at those specific numbers, right, we know that in 2016 that there's 13,000 eligible voters. But when we look at this, if we're just looking at position 1, we can get a sense of 1,293 is nowhere near close 13,000. And so we have in the 6th grade standards where when we look at ratios and proportions, we're looking at finding the percent of a number, right? And so for this example, we're going to let N represent the number of voters. So we're just trying to get a sense of what is exactly, we're trying to find those benchmark percent. So those easy percents, and an easy percent to find is 10%, right? So to figure this out, right, we're trying to figure out how did we get from 13,000 to 100, finding an equivalent fraction or an equivalent percent. And we figured out that 13,000 divided by 130, we get 100. So with that same logic, I know that to go from 100 to 13,000, I have to multiply it by 130. So in order for it to be equivalent to be balanced, we're going to do the same thing to find the number of voters for 10% of this 13,000. Right? So we're going to find the product. So in the chat, what is 10 times 130? So just in the chat, 10 times 130. Awesome. Great. All right, so when we multiply 10 by 130, we get 1,300. So 10% of the eligible voters, right? I just like to round it, is 1,300. And so when we're looking at this, right, we learn that 10% of 13,000 is 100, 300. With that said, what do we notice about the total votes for position 1? So we're just looking at the highlighted. So what do we notice? So if we know that 1,300 is 10%, what do we notice about position 1? So what do you notice? And we're just looking at position 1. So we just figured out 10% of a number, or a percent of a number, so 10% of 13,000. But what do we notice about position 1? Are we at 13,000? Less than 10%, right? And we're talking about eligible voters. So this is 2016. So our numbers have slightly increased, right? Yep. Less than 10% of voters voted for each candidate. Yes. Exactly. And so we're learning about percents, but we're also going back to place value and comparing less than, greater than. And so this math lesson kind of encompasses all of that, right? Especially looking at those ratio and proportion standards for 6th grade. Great. Okay, so we kind of noticed that with just looking at position 1 and really looking at all of them, right? All of the candidates that did win the election, right? Their position, it's less than 10% or just a little over 10%. All right, so let's think back to that original question, right? If we look back at the percentage of votes, right? A lot of you said, and I'm just going to go back to the chat. A lot of you said, so when we were talking about writing our way in, we're always reflecting. And a lot of you said over 50%, right? We had 51, we had 60, 75, 66, 80%, 75. And this is kind of the trend that I see in my classroom, that my students are, they say, oh, 95%, right? It's usually about 80 to 100%. That's kind of the average that they get when we write our way in, right? But we always go back and we think about, I said 50%, and that was being very generous, right? Okay, so although it's a math class, right? We always look at different pieces of writing, especially the Constitution. So in the Blackfeet Constitution, it states that the candidate that receives the largest number of votes, right, they will be elected. And so I always just give them the Constitution. I don't try to water it down whatsoever, just so that they get a sense of that language. And we kind of talk about this sentence by sentence, well, what does this mean? Well, what do you think it means? Right? And when I first created this, I thought there should be some sort of clause, right? Or I'm used to where I served on Kiayo, right? And we couldn't vote unless we had a specific number of eligible voters, right? Or officers, right? We couldn't make decisions unless we had that set number. But according to our constitution, which is like a lot of tribal constitutions, you just need to have the largest number of votes. And so we get into discussions, is that fair? Is that a good representation of our community, right? Okay, so we're going back to that 9%, right? So is 9% a good representation of the Blackfeet community? So when we think about 9%, we think about those specific numbers. And I think position 1, it was 1,296, right? Are those 1,300 people a good representation of our community, right? And so I kind of want you to think about that number, that percentage you gave at the beginning, and then compare it to like the actual voters, right? Great. All right, let's keep moving. So we figured out that 10% of 13,000 is 1,300. So what is 20% of 13,000? So just post in the chat. Awesome. Great. Right, and this kind of gives them a sense of finding different benchmark percents. And if you know 10%, then you should be able to figure out all of the other percents, right? Awesome. So in the chat, I want you to identify the percent represented in the 10 by 10 grid. Great. I'm so used to having students and it being like super loud. That it's kind of hard to get back into like online. Great. So the percent represented in the grid is 19%, right? Okay. So we're going back to those general election results. So based on the total votes, and we're looking at that blue highlighted, right? Did we have at least 20% of eligible voters, right, in the 2016 general election? So remember, we figured out 10% of 13,000 was 1,300, and we just figured out that 20% is 2,600, right? So did we have at least 20%? Just under, right? No. Okay. All right. So just based on, and that a lot of this, I have a great relationship with the ladies at Documents, but also part of this is just a simple search in our local newspaper, Glacier Reporter, and we just kind of figure out the percentage of voters, and we just use that 13,000, right? We use that 2016 number, and we use that to look at the past couple votes, right? And I have 2023 because we had a special election, right? And so we can see that it's pretty steady, right? What's happening in this table? And I always ask my kiddos, is it increasing? Is it decreasing? What's happening? What's going on? Yes, yes, whoa. And that's how my kiddos feel. And so I really try to, we think about sixth grade, they're about 11 years old, 11, 12 years old, right? And they are getting a sense of, oh my gosh, right? And I always try to bring it back to them. And I think about, okay, let's say that this class period is our community. And let's say we were holding elections and only one of you showed up and you said, oh, my friend is going to be our leader, right? And so I really kind of make it applicable or like in the classroom, just so they can get a sense of how really low these numbers are. And we kind of discuss, why do you think these numbers are low, right? And a lot of it is, so I've worked the tribal elections pretty much every year. And I think it's just a sense of, you know, I'm not really quite sure. I know that I always try to bug my family to vote. And there's about half of us that are, you know, we're there at our polling place, we vote. Yeah. So we don't do any, and I can't even think of it. So it has to be in person, right? And we're filling it out in a ballot. And then we have this special machine, right, that scans all the ballots. So these are Blackfeet voters in our tribal elections. And in order to be a voter, right, you have to have at least 1/4 of Blackfeet blood, and you have to be enrolled and over at least 18 years old, right? Great. Now we're just kind of going through. So we looked at percentage, we looked at the results, right? And then we come back to this. So the people that we're voting in, right? They oversee a lot of major enterprises on our reservation, right? And so I always go back, okay, you're the only one that showed up and you voted your friend in, and now they make the decisions of the entire school, right? And you're just hoping your friend knows all the expectations, knows the rules, right? Okay, so when we're thinking about those election results, is 10 to 20% a reasonable percentage to elect the leaders in our community, right? And I really try to put it on them, and I really am mindful of the phrasing that I use, so I'm not trying to put my beliefs on them. Because this is something like I'm really passionate about, but I also don't want to say, you know, put my words into their mouth, right? Yes, I like that. I like the idea. Especially this upcoming year is going to be an election year. Oh my gosh. I apologize. Great. So we really talk about, it's all about that reflection. Yes, they shouldn't make the decisions, but they usually end up making the decisions. And so it's just this like vicious cycle of all of this controversy. Great. Okay, so write your way out. So what do we do with this information, right? Yes, it's important that kiddos learn percentage. Absolutely. It's important that they learn our community's history, government, or just a tribal history and tribal government, right? That's important. But the most important thing is, what are you going to do with that information, right? And how can it be used within, see my typo, how can it be used within our community, right? And so it's going through all of that information, but the way we traditionally learn, right? You can't just keep that knowledge to yourself. You have to share it, right? And so we really try to brainstorm, and every class is different, especially when I've done this, right? Every class has been different. And so their kind of ideas have differed of what we do with this information. Yes, exactly. They should present this to the council. Find a way to increase. Love that. Exactly. And especially with the election coming up this year. So 2 years ago, I had this class is very, the 8th graders were very opinionated, right? And so they were like, we need to let the council know. We're going to write some letters. These are our issues, right? If they're representing us, they need to know what the issues are as a 6th grade student, right? Or we had different students that were like, no, my uncle's running for council and I'm going to let him know. So we got to figure out how we get more people, right? Love that. Love all these responses in the chat. Exactly. Right. And I really,
if it's okay, I'm going to read a couple of them out loud, just so when we have the recording, so that people won't see the chat. And so let's see. So Mike Jetty suggested students should present this to the council. And then I love that this is an opportunity to see how mathematics can inform what is happening in a community. It has the potential to create an emotional response to math that will hopefully make an impact when students start to vote. This is also a great example of how building what many call social and emotional skills can be woven into a lesson. This is fantastic. It would be great to engage the students in their thoughts on how to increase voter turnout. They can assess what barriers exist that prevent people from voting and potentially advocate for services that can support getting people. I mean, this is just fantastic. This is some really deep learning here.
Absolutely. And you think about, I always go back to one of my mentors, Tammy Elser, and she said, don't water things down, right? And so whenever we're looking at any kind of primary document, whether it's the eligible voters, whether it's the election, I'm never watering anything down. I'm never modifying it. We're just looking at the actual primary document, right? And so they get a chance of how do we use this information to inform others, or how do we use it to become agents of change? Yes. All right, so that kind of wraps up the lesson portion, right? And the lesson that I do, so that comes from a lot of my slides that I make every day. And where I go on this part, right? This is kind of more for us, the educators or the people that are in the trenches, right? So where do we begin? My thing is content matters, right? If you don't know your focus standards, if you don't know, especially in math, those mathematical practices, if you don't know the content, it's going to be really hard to create a culturally sustaining lesson or to identify one, right? So that content has to be there. The next thing is tribal values, right? Anything that I do, I always think about, well, what tribal values am I following in this lesson, right? And it really kind of grounds me with, is it cooperation? I use a lot of humor, right? And I always go back to IEFA, right? Those essential understandings. And so that's kind of where I start, because the thing with math is that there is wonderful ELA lessons, there's wonderful social studies lessons, wonderful music lessons on IEFA, right? But math, that's where there isn't too much, right? And so a lot of the time I'm just like creating my own, right? And I'm utilizing my community resources. All right, just to review, right? Here's our mathematical practices. And I usually have these posted in my room so my kiddos see them, right? And I see them, and I always try to refer to them any lesson that I do, especially that persevere in solving problems, right? All right, tribal values. Again, this is where I always like to start before I create a lesson, before I do a lesson, any type of lesson, right? I always try to think about what type of values do I want my kiddos to learn or to follow. And a lot of these are the ones that I usually tend to use, right? Respect, courage, especially it can be scary as a 11-year-old, 12-year-old to, go out into your community and say, you need to vote, right? Responsibility, observation, right? So the tribal values guide me and it guides my students. All right, and then the IEFA essential understandings, right? So I always start with content. I start with those mathematical practices, tribal values, and the essential understandings. Where does it fall under essential understandings, right? Okay, so we have all that, right? And if you're unfamiliar, I have a little screenshot of the book to the right. And so this comes from Cornell Purity, right? Hopefully you got to see him. He was doing a tour thanks to our awesome union president, Dana Bender, right? He came and visited and talked about his book, right? And so this Indigenous praxis model is something that I always learn and I've learned and I try to use, right? And I really try, the goal is always to hit that top level where it's social justice, right? And it's where we talk about, you want these kiddos to be teachers of teachers. You want them to engage in that research, right? And be protectors of sacred knowledge. But also with that knowledge, what are you going to do to transform your community, right? And so that's what we're always trying to aim for. And that's kind of where all my lessons try to reach, right? And if you want more information, he has an awesome book out. So definitely read that. Right. Just for time's sake. Make sure I didn't skip anything. Okay, so what is next? Right? So you reflect on your own teaching practices, right? Where a lot of us are teachers in the classroom, and I'm always thinking about how can I make that more culturally sustaining, or what can I do to bring in the community, right? And what do I want my students to do with this knowledge? Learning about tribal elections, learning about the constitutions, great. But what can we do? What are they going to do with that information? What do I want them to do with that information? All right, the next one, provide high expectations. I love incorporating cultural knowledge. I try to incorporate the language as much as I can, but the most important thing that I do, and especially those of us that are math teachers, right? We have to have high expectations. So yes, it's important with everything, but high expectations is a must. If we have those high expectations, most likely what I've learned is my kiddos will go beyond those expectations. Again, I keep saying, do not water things down, especially when you're looking at the Constitution, when you're looking at those election results, right? We don't want to water anything down. Research, and you got to do the work. That's probably the hardest thing to do, especially if you're new to that community, or maybe you've just come back to that community and you don't really have too many connections, right? It's just about getting in there and doing the work, right? And making friends with the ladies at documents, tribal documents. With that said, right, collaborate, find those pillars within your community or within your teaching community. That's kind of really where I thrive. I thrive when I have, when I work in a team, especially when I'm working with my co-teachers, because I'm the only math teacher in my grade level. So my other math colleagues are the other grade level math teachers. So I really reflect, or I really try to support and try to collaborate with the ELA teacher or the social studies teacher, right? Finding those other disciplines and collaborating and trying to find, I think what worked really well within our team the past couple of years is that all of us were, the goal wasn't, oh, I need to get these kiddos ready for the SBAC, or I need to get them ready for 7th grade or the next grade level, right? In all of our disciplines, we had, this isn't just for the next grade level. This is our community. We were all community members, right? We were all enrolled members of our tribe, and the goal is tribal sovereignty. So for all of us, whether we taught science, ELA, everything goes back to, these are our future leaders, and what type of knowledge do I want those future leaders to have, right? All right, so I'm just gonna really run through some quick examples of other units I've created, right? I talk about tribal identity, and that's where we get into adding, subtracting fractions, right? And we talk about, I really try to focus it on identity, right? And we have to talk about blood quantum when we talk about identity, when we're talking about tribal nations. right? And so they're looking at the Constitution. They're looking at other tribes' constitutions, right? And then we're looking at the controversy, right? What are the different sides saying? Another example we've done is the and I say we, and it's just me. I don't know why I say we, but allotment, right? And so this is one I did within the past 2 weeks, right? And so we are looking at this historical event through a mathematical lens. And we're talking about area, we're talking about just different types of shapes, perimeter, right? But then we also get the allotment, sovereignty, and we're looking at the actual Dawes Act, right, in a math class. Another example I did was the tribal budget, right? And so this came from just kind of what our tribe was allocating COVID, right? American Rescue Plan Act funds and what was spent, especially when we talk about that arbor that's being built, right? It's about $10 million that our tribe is spending on building that arbor, right? And so we talk about, we go back to that percentage lesson and we talk about, is 10% of our community good representation, especially when we talk about these large numbers. So we're getting into place value, we're getting into adding and subtracting large amounts, right? Okay. If you have any more questions or anything, right? Definitely share in the chat or just unmute yourself. Scientific notation, yes.
Thank you so much, Adriane. I just kept reflecting on, that the relevance and responsible citizenships and civics and real world knowledge and the power of voice, not giving a lesson on the power of voice, but giving a lesson that's and the moral of this story is the power of your voice.
Exactly.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much. But yes, if anyone has any comments or questions, please feel free to unmute. Just bear in mind, we do only have 4 short minutes left. So if you also want to put a question in chat, I can field those as well.
Yes, so I haven't looked at any other tribes, and it's just because we focus mainly on the community that we live in, but that would be a really interesting exploration. We look at, especially, I think it's CSKT, they do their elections in the fall, and we hold ours in the June of even number years.
Adriane, I think you're a remarkable teacher.
Thank you.
What a great job to make it so relative to your students at, 8th grade. Is that right? What you teach?
I teach 6th grade.
6th grade. Oh my goodness. That's wonderful to get kids thinking about how numbers affect themselves.
Yes.
Excellent.
Powerful.
Thank you so much for sharing today.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep. And Jay, you've only got 1 minute.
Does your district re-enumerate you for creating your own curriculum?
No. So I use the curriculum that our district adopted. So it's the Reveal Math through McGraw-Hill, and I just use it as a resource when I'm creating these specific examples. I've reached out to our Indian Ed department, right? But it's just been a crazy busy year, so if I don't.
So that other question I had for you is the cooperative that you're a part of, do you know which one it is?
No.
Yeah, great job. Thank you. I'll chat with you some more.
Okay. Great.
Raise your hand if you would like Adriane to come to Billings and present at our conference.
I was there last year, guys, too.
I know. And you got rave reviews. I was so bummed I couldn't, being the conference coordinator, I had a hard time being in all the places. But I just thank you so much, especially since you weren't feeling 100% and had some other things going on with your kiddo and all of that. But I thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for joining us, especially Katrina. We are so excited that you're on board and you were able to see some of the work that we get to tap into. So thank you, everyone, so much. I hope you get enjoy this last of this fall weather, even though it's very windy here in Helena. Something hit my house a little while ago, assuming it was a branch. But anyhow, I wish everyone the best evening. And Adriane, just from the bottom of my heart, I thank you so much for this wonderful, wonderful presentation. Have a good evening, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for showing up.